Hello, hello, hello. Hello. Thank you for joining us for the 12th edition of Expo Chicago Contemporary Art Fair. I'm the Artistic Director of Expo Chicago, Kate Sears-Patowski, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the final dialogues of this year, presented in partnership with the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Dialogues offers panel discussions, conversations, and provocative artistic discourse with leading artists, curators, designers, and arts professionals on the current issues that engage them. City in a Garden, Queer Art and Activism in Chicago is an upcoming intergenerational group exhibition at the Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago opening in July. Highlighting the pivotal yet often underacknowledged role Chicago has played in the story of queer art and activism, the exhibition examines this history from the mid-1980s, when activists radically mobilized in response to the US government's disastrous handling of the AIDS crisis. City in a Garden brings together work from over 30 artists and collectives working in Chicago from the 80s to present. This afternoon, I am honored to welcome our esteemed panelists, artists Edie, Doug Ischar, and Patric McCoy, and our wonderful moderator, assistant curator at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Jack Schneider. I will now hand it over to Jack to get us started.
All right, thank you, Kate. Hi, everyone. So I just have to say, I have to thank everyone for coming because it is the final program of a very long week. I'm sure everyone's like a little tired. I'm definitely a little tired, but I think this will be a fun way to close out the weekend. And before we start, I want to quickly say thank you to Taylor Payton, Kate Sears-Patowski, and the whole team at Expo for making this program possible, and also to congratulate them on a really inspired slate of programs at this year's Expo. So let's get a round of applause for Expo. Yay. So this program serves as a preview of City in a Garden, Queer Art and Activism in Chicago, an exhibition I'm organizing that opens, as Kate said, at the MCA in July, on July 5th in particular. The exhibition, it examines the city's essential, yet I think all too often overlooked or underacknowledged role in the histories of queer art and activism. And it does this through the work of over 30 artists, artist collectives, activist groups, as Kate said, working from the 1980s to the present, based in Chicago. And I'm really excited to be joined by a representative set of these artists on stage today, Edie, Patric, and Doug. So to get us started, I'd like to ask each of you to just really briefly describe your work that's in the show. And I think we will start with you, Doug.
Yes, hello. I moved to Chicago from San Francisco in 1983 to study photography
Yeah, a little closer.
to study photography from the beginning. I was a beginning photographer. So I had been a cellist in the San Francisco Opera Orchestra for many years. And so in my early 30s, I decided to try a different horse. So it was photography. And not long after I began using a camera and wandering the streets of Chicago, trying to be a street photographer, I realized that what I really wanted to do was to photograph gay men, my subculture, my people, in a sense, you know, in interactions with each other. I didn't want to make nudes in a studio. I didn't want to do anything that was typically called gay photography, you know. But I did want to do something that was much more documentary oriented and much more about the sort of interactions that sustain, you know, a community over time. So this was my second attempt. My first attempt was the year before, when I photographed the entire summer at the Belmont Rocks in black and white. And I was dissatisfied with those photographs, and the following year I redid them. It was an entirely new project, of course, but in color, and those are the pictures that are in this show. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. I think next, Patric, if you could talk a bit about your work that's in the exhibition.
Yes, I have to identify myself as an inadvertent photojournalist because I didn't start out to do this at all. In fact, I had made a commitment in the mid-'80s to teach myself photography because I didn't know how to do 35 millimeter photography. And I had a 3-point commitment. I wrote it out. I was to carry a camera everywhere I went for the whole year, always visible. So I had the camera hanging off me. I was going to take pictures every day. And I wrote the third part of the commitment was that if anybody asked me to take their picture, and I'm thinking my friends and family, if anybody asked me to take their picture, I was going to stop what I was doing and take their picture. All right, at that time, I was working with the EPA in the Chicago office downtown, and I was commuting to work on a bicycle. So, and I lived in South Shore. So I'm riding 12 and a half miles every day with the camera hanging off my neck, looking like the absolute nerd. And I wasn't thinking anything, but I'm riding along the lake or along through the black neighborhoods, and they were totally different. I think we'll talk about it a little bit later than they are today. Surprisingly, men standing on the streets and along the lakefront would see me riding past with this camera and say, "Hey, take my picture." I'm stopped. I'm like, "Oh, I got to take it." So what I have accumulated over that year, which then went on to several years, all the way up to the end of 1989, were thousands and thousands of images of black men that asked me, not I'm asking them, asked me to take their picture. And I did not pose them. I took the best picture I could with the situations. And what I found later, because I was also going to work, there was a bar, Rialto. It was right around the corner from my job. So I would stop in there on the way to work, stop there during lunch, stop after work, stop. And in around that bar, also, the men would be asking me to take their picture. And I never thought that would ever happen, but I ended up effectively documenting the black, what we now would call gay community. They wouldn't have agreed to that at the time, the gay community of the 1980s.
Thanks, Patric. That was great. Okay, Edie, could you talk to us a bit about the memory palaces?
Yeah, Memory Palaces is a series of drawings I did about a decade, I guess a little over a decade ago. I had moved back to Chicago and started getting these kind of like, I would find like scraps of like the logo for a gay bar in an old magazine, like little hints of queer spaces that had happened in Chicago before. And the Memory Palaces series was really about kind of taking the vernacular architecture of Chicago and reimagining those spaces. Not necessarily as like a nostalgia trip or, you know, being like, oh, this happened before, it can never happen again, but spaces that were queer or feminist, like Jane was an underground abortion network, but really trying to take Chicago's architectural language and the radical spaces that had happened in it, the community spaces that had happened in it, and thinking about space making and queer space making.
Thank you, Edie.
Yeah, so that's the driving force behind these drawings of buildings.
Wonderful, thank you. So my first question is going to be for both Patric and Doug. Your projects are firsthand accounts of the Belmont Rocks and the Rialto Tap, respectively. And I'm wondering if you could just, for the audience, talk a little bit about like what the scene was like at these places. And in particular, I'm interested if maybe you could reflect a bit on how these places relate to or differ from similar places today. I think I'm really interested specifically to hear if there's anything that happened there and then that you don't think could happen in the here and now. And either of you can feel free to start.
Okay. The Rialto bar was a seedy bar. It was a kind of a bar of its time because it was at the end of the sexual revolution that had started in the 1960s. And Chicago had a whole network, a whole community in the southern part of the Loop that was devoted to the sexual revolution, i.e. peep shows and burlesque and all kinds of SRO rooms that were used for transsexual sex and so forth. So the South Loop, totally different than what it is today, was run down Skid Row. And the Rialto was sitting right in the middle of that. And it was a bar that, if we're going to talk about something that might be today, it would only exist on television. It would be a black Cheers bar. Everybody was welcome. Everybody knew each other's names, and all kinds of things were going on in it. It was a bar that back in the 1980s, you could smoke marijuana with impunity right at the bar. There were all kinds of, there was drug transactions going in there. There were all kinds of sexual hookups that were going on in the place. They had some of the best house music in the city because the DJs that were just starting house music at the warehouse would come over and spin at the Rialto. So you got all kinds of things going on. It was a bar which catered, because of its proximity, to the homeless crowd. The biggest homeless shelter, the Pacific Gardens, was just 2 blocks away. So those people would come to the bar, but it also was a bar that catered to the upper classes. That Harold Washington was the mayor. The downtown area was very comfortable and welcoming to black people at that time. All the stores and retail catered to black people, so there was a large number of black people in the Loop all day and night. And the Rialto opened at 6 a.m. in the morning, and it closed at 4 a.m. in the night. And on Saturday, it stayed open another hour, and it would close at 5. So it was only closed for 2 or 1 hour every day. So there was always a place for people that needed a warm spot or a cheap beer to come in there. It was a place in which was a sanctuary. During the 1980s, the public housing system, which had the projects, there was a huge projects in Chicago, and the projects were changed over from being supporting of black poor families to black poor families, period, to women with children. So the male had to leave, legally could not be in the public housing. So during the month, there would be a period where black men would have to leave the projects and go and find shelter, and they would go downtown and they'd go to the Pacific Garden Missions, and so the bar that was nearest was their sanctuary. There would also be a whole crowd of people that were homeless because of joblessness. Reagan had tanked the economy. Sounds like something happened today. Reagan had tanked the economy, and Chicago went from being a city where there was always jobs to a place where there was a large number of people that were thrown out and just didn't have any places to go. And so there were homeless camps right in Grant Park, huge stretches of people, and they would come to the Rialto because that was a place they could get out of the weather and so forth. So it was a mix of all kinds of people in this bar, and I loved it, okay?
Thanks, Pat.
And it was a place where many, many people saw me with this camera on the dance floor, just buying drinks and so forth, and would say, hey, take my picture. So I'd have to go out of the bar or take their pictures inside of the bar. So inadvertently, I was not trying to be a bar photographer, and I was not trying to capture that scene, but I actually did. If there's anything similar today, no. I don't see any bar, any kind of a place that was as welcoming and open to being yourself. So the labels that we use today, gay and queer and so forth, they would not have been accepted, but they were doing everything you could possibly imagine.
And you mentioned, just real quickly, you mentioned Harold Washington.
Yes.
The Rialto, I think it was torn down in 1990, if I'm
Yes,
not
that's
mistaken,
correct.
and to
Right.
make room for the Harold Washington Library.
That's correct.
So that's where it was. Thanks, Patrick. That was
Thank
great. Doug, could you tell us a bit about what the Belmont Rocks were like?
Yes. I was new to Chicago, and I was astonished to find this giant gay beach, so-called, even though it was not sandy, it was grassy, and hundreds of men there on the weekends, and extremely kind of social and again, super heavily attended, and I'm losing my train of thought. Yeah, my primary point is that this monstrous beach was right in the middle of a big city, and it was unmistakable, and this was the only place that I knew of, and I had traveled a lot of places in Europe and the States, and I would always check out the beaches and the bars, of course, being a gay man, and it was the first thing I did. And there was nothing like this in the rest of the world, where very centrally located and very evidently, I could say blatantly gay, queer, a stone's throw from a major traffic artery, and totally unabashed, totally shameless, and totally sort of free. So it was really an astonishing. It was a beautiful thing to find, and it was a perfect place to photograph because I went there 7 days a week for 2 summers. And I was very, very relentless, dogged, dedicated, whatever you want to say. And people just sort of got used to me. I just became the resident nuisance, And after a while, it was like I was a fly on the wall, and no one objected. I almost never had someone to say, "Don't take my picture." And I was also really only interested in pictures that came about of their own accord, in a sense. I didn't want to stage direct the photographs, or I would never add something to a photograph or move a person or move a book or anything like that. And the other thing that sort of makes these pictures a bit odd is that there are a lot of book covers in the pictures, and the mid-'80s were the heyday of image text art photography, and so my more or less sly little way of getting this to happen was to simply look for the books that guys brought to the beach with them, and they brought everything, There's a book of Verlaine poetry. There's a Diane Arbus biography. It was everything. So it was again sort of an unprecedented and unequaled place, and an incredible opportunity for me to photograph, and I loved doing it. So.
Yeah, and for those of you who don't know, I think the Belmont Rocks were demolished, I think in 2003, if I'm not mistaken. But they were where the AIDS Garden Chicago is now, which is, I can't remember the cross street, but there's a big Keith Haring sculpture. I'm sure you've seen it, at least driving by. My next question is for you, Edie. So your project takes a different approach to Patrick and Doug's work in the sense that it's retrospective, right? You've created these kind of speculative renderings of, trying to get back there, of organizations and places that, in some cases, closed like well before you were born, I think. So my question is simple. It's just, why did you decide to sort of focus on these past places with this project?
Well, I think I touched on it a little bit
Yeah.
describing the work, but it really was this feeling of I'd been living on a school bus for a couple years, driving around, and the bus broke down, and I ended up back in Chicago, which was amazing.
Yeah.
But I remember like the feeling of walking around and being like, there is like, this is a queer space here, and what was it? What is it? And I think the Memory Palace series really came to me as I wasn't necessarily interested in depicting like queer or trans visibility in terms of like portraits necessarily. But I think that like kind of depicting these spaces that no longer existed was a form of visibility for like queer impulses, like a wit, like a lot of bar names. Like there was the first gay bar I sort of reimagined was called the Virgo Out, and I'm a Virgo, and it was always, I was like, oh, like, where's the Virgo Out? And it had this amazing logo that was like the zodiac in this kind of like chain around a hand-drawn logo that said Virgo Out. It was very beautiful, and it was a really inspiring, like, I was like, I want to dance there, I want to drink there. Like, it's sort of getting like a hint of something and
Sure.
recognizing it, and also being able to take that into the present. Because I think, you know, we're in an age now where so much of the world that we're in, we create on the internet. It's like a virtual connection with people. But I also think that understanding like the physical spaces that we've had in the world and the importance of that is really critical. And that's part of these drawings.
Please.
Can I ask you a question? Yeah, of course. I saw on your slides the Newberry Theater. Have you ever been there?
I had never been there, no.
Ooh, baby.
Please tell me more.
please. There it is.
The Newberry was in that square where the Newberry Library is to the north, but there's a square there that's called Washington Square. It is now all sanitized and gentrified and all that stuff. It was one of the most seedy spots of this whole city. It was a square, it was called Bug House Square. We call it Bug House, which comes from an old use of the square, because there's only 2 public oratory spots in the city of Chicago, official oratory spots, where you can go and stand on the soapbox if you want to and talk about whatever you want. It was where the communists and the labor unions and so forth. The other one is in Washington Park. There's 2. So Bug House Square had gotten this reputation because of the communists and all that stuff. It was seedy. And it descended from there down to a point where it was the spot where men that wanted to sell themselves would stand on all around the square, and cars would go in circles and circles and circles and pick up. And the Newberry Theater was right there on the west side of that. So it got a lot of the overflow from the Bug House Square. It's interesting how the city has sanitized itself. And the places that, like Belmont Rocks, they'll put up a statue, but they won't let that continue.
Right.
We'll have the Rialto, which could have stayed forever, but they won't let that. They'll put a little park there that nobody goes to.
Right.
But they'll tear it down.
Yeah, this brings me to a question I wanted to ask for everyone. With all 3 of these projects, we're looking at places, spaces, organizations from the past, places that don't exist anymore. And to me, I think this maybe runs somewhat counter to this like narrative of progress. This idea that like the last like half century has seen this like steady improvement in the lives and treatment of LGBTQ people. So I'm curious, like, what do we think about that idea? Like, do we think that life is better now for queer people than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago? Like, what do we think is similar? What do we think is different?
Yes, but how long is that going to last?
Sure, sure.
Is the big question, I think.
Yeah.
With Trump and his thugs, pretty much having their way these days, although they're making a huge mess of things at the same time, it's hard to say how, for example, their obsession with trans people and their cruelty towards trans people is going to play out over time. Will there be a backlash? Will there be a movement in response to that? I'm certainly hoping so, that people will not be quiet and just sort of go quietly, as they say. So, yeah.
I mean, I think with that cruelty, like, we're being shoved into a world where this incredible cruelty towards immigrants and trans people is conditioning us towards just a super policing of identity. And it's cruel, and it's, I look to sort of underground aspects of community, things that are offline, networks that are interpersonal and in person, as really psychically nourishing for me right now. And I think that is something to look at the way that queer life has coded itself in the past, and that might be where we're sort of headed back to in the very near future / present. But yeah, I don't know. Just some thoughts. I don't know about better or worse. There's maybe some.
I might have a contrary view to that, is that I agree with what you just said. Those conditions are real, but I actually think that the situation today is actually worse than before, because of the focus on identity. That there's been this push, and it's great that people are able to present themselves in any kind of way they want, and that in our larger sort of society, we're supposed to accept that. But the fact that you are pushing an identity tends to skew the spectrum. So you got all the different types of people that kind of played around in that world now are being put into this one category of queer, which most of those folks don't identify with that. Most of these people did not think about the situation of formal, legally relationships, but they were pushed into that mode that's the only way you can have a relationship with another human being, and we accept it. When we had a spectrum that covered a whole lot of people that might be, I'll dabble with this today and I'll do something tomorrow. Is that, in fact, in the black community during the 1980s, we never identified ourselves with nouns, gay, so forth. It took a long time. In fact, it was by the end of the 80s that the black community, gay community, accepted gay, because it did not do that.
Right.
Is that we use verbs, i.e. things that you were doing, but you could do something else. And that allowed a lot of transactional things to go along with a lot of people. In fact, if you look at the body of my work, most of those folks don't present. They present themselves masculine, because that is what that world was. It was a world that was just below the level of visibility. Is that people, you could look like this and do, and not be called out or whatever, but you were doing everything.
Right.
So I actually think that it has been more restrictive on what I see the world was than it is today.
And I've found that really this really fascinating in our conversations. It was sort of a new idea to me, actually, was that the kind of resistance to categorization, really, that the people in your community had, and maybe still do have, actually, in some senses, like offering greater like mobility and freedom in terms of behavior and what they do. Of course, like, it's another thing, like once you create a kind of identity category, like there is some power in that because you become a constituency that, politicians can serve, but you also become a constituency that politicians can attack, right? And I'm wondering if this might be a good moment to talk about your new piece, Edie, that's up at the museum.
Sure, yeah.
I think I have some slides of it. This is a mural by Edie that's currently on view at the museum. The exhibition that all of these lovely folks are a part of doesn't open until July, but this is on view at the museum now. You could even go, well, if you can race to the museum before it closes at 5 p.m. today, you could see it. But yeah, what
Leave
can you
now,
tell
you
us?
might get there. Yeah.
Yeah, leave now. Yeah.
Might get there. But yeah, it's up for a minute too. And
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like it's a big wall, and I feel like the root of my work has been these kind of architectural renderings, but they're not just about re-examining spaces in the past. They're also about speculating what does it look like, what does queer space look like, and what could I envision with this kind of practice I have. So this mural is called the Free Clinic for Gender Affirming Care, and that's sort of it's very blunt force, it's a design that's like, it was designed before the election, but also in the face of like the past 8 years of harsh kind of transphobic escalation in the culture and the evaporation of resources for trans and gender nonconforming people. And again, I think the ultimate goal, like, to have that freedom of identity and that ability to both know who you are and to defy definition. I think about, like, there's a portion of my work that was so concentrated with finding language for essentially what's like non-binary and like nuances of transness, but like also to want freedom in that, to be like whoever in the world doing whatever. And I think that to think about how important gender affirming care can be just for the health of community and how open that can be for people, and how needed it is, and also how under attack it is, that to be able to keep visualizing it and to be able to keep working towards something like it was important for me in terms of creating this. Yeah.
I think it's kind of a crucial problem for many elements in this society today, which is especially progressive elements, which is to, on the one hand, support a kind of socialist attitude towards the division of wealth and so on and so forth. A fairer system than what we have today by a long ways, but also to allow, and this I think we've sort of been bitten in the butt by the whole woke nightmare, but to also to allow for this sort of I don't want to call it individualism because that has such a grim rep, but just self-determining, determining one's life as one wishes, within the context of a society that's more fairly organized and administered. So I hope that's possible. I probably won't be here for it, but it seems like a really crucial mix of qualities that until we have both those things in place, there will always be huge problems socially and politically.
Is it? Again, I have a kind of a contrary view to this. This has historically been a very progressive city politically, and yet all these places that would have, in my terminology, been affirming care kind of plus have been eliminated.
Right.
Is that just a statistic? There's like 2 bars that would on the South Side that would cater to African Americans today. It was like 20 plus at that time. And then that's the ones that you could kind of know if you were in the neighborhood that that's what was there. But then there were also tons of neighborhood bars that were really undercover, but they were there. So care is when you have places that you can go easily and feel comfortable. Yeah. So they, in this liberal movement to gentrify and they've actually eliminated all those things. Places that the bathhouses and so forth offer, oh, no, that's not nice. Mm-hmm. Instead of letting people do what they want to do. Mm-hmm. So I feel like we have, in this move to be liberal, have actually destroyed the liberal behavior of human beings. Mm-hmm.
There's an essay in there. Should write that. But one of the things and it's true, there's like, and this isn't just a phenomena in Chicago, but like, I think nationwide, there's significantly less gay and lesbian bars now than there used to be. I mean, especially lesbian bars. We are blessed to have like 1 in the city now, 1, maybe 2, but there used to be so many more. So that's kind of part of what I was getting at earlier in asking this question of like, I guess how accurate is this narrative of progress, right? But one of the things I love about this mural, and really one of the reasons I wanted to work on this show in general, is I was really interested in the kind of like early formation of queer politics and actually how radical it was when it first kind of calcified in the midst of the AIDS crisis. And one of the things I think is really interesting, I mean, we think of, I think the really basic understanding, pedestrian understanding of queer politics is like, oh, we had marriage equality and everything's great. No, that's like such a narrow view of what people were asking for. And one of the things was, during the AIDS crisis, these activists were asking for universal health care. So they were asking for something that would, of course, help people who were suffering from HIV/AIDS, but something that would also just help everybody. And so I love that you included the word free in here. It's the free clinic for gender affirming care. But I wanted to back up a bit and talk a little bit about the socio-political context within which Doug and Patric, you shot your images. It's the mid-'80s. It's several years into the AIDS crisis. At a time when the number of people affected by the pandemic was still growing exponentially, when there was a lot of uncertainty around the disease, and when effective treatments were still like years and years away. So it's this, I of course didn't live through it, but retrospectively it seems like a pretty dark time. But yet, that's not necessarily like immediately apparent in your images. Like Doug, your images are bright, leisurely, romantic, and Patric's, yours are often really like fun and sexy. So my question is, I guess, if and how the AIDS crisis factored into your decision to take the images you did at the time that you did.
Well, I was critically aware of that condition all the time I was shooting. I felt like I was working against the clock, because I really felt that the way AIDS was going and the way the reaction to AIDS was going on the right in the United States, especially. That we might not be around that much longer, both in terms of like surviving this dreadful disease, and also surviving the reaction from that opportunistic persons, had taken the opportunity to try to force us back into the closet, underground, so on and so forth. So I was crucially aware of the fact that this was a conserving project. I was trying to save something that I thought might be lost forever. And people ask me, why are the pictures so happy in this terrible time? And the truth is that people at the beach were happy, you know, they were enjoying themselves. And I wanted very much to show, you know, the persistence of this mood of behavior and interaction amongst gay people in the midst of this very dark time. I think it said something really remarkable about the resilience of these men, you know, that they were still able to enjoy themselves, you know, in a public place during this time of danger and repression. And there's one more thing. That's fine. I'm done.
I'm going to have to speak about public ignorance because you asked me what I was feeling at the time. Is that human beings have a way of not recognizing or realizing that the seriousness of something. In the black community, and I can't say all of them, but during the early 80s, black people really did not think this was going to affect them. It was a white disease. And so we were partying on the Titanic all during the 80s, and it's only at the end of the 80s that we'd gone to so many funerals and so forth that the light bulb started to come on, like, oh, wait, this is real. So we weren't, I was out there partying. We were not thinking about it. We heard about the protests and so forth, but we really didn't think of it as being directed to us. There were some black people that were involved in activism for the AIDS, but that was not the norm. That was not the norm during that time period. We were actually having a great time.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah.
I guess just one more question before we open it up to questions from the audience. So one of the reasons why I organized, and this is for all panelists, so one of the reasons why I decided to organize this show is because, in my view, Chicago has been relatively underappreciated, under-theorized in the history of queer art and activism, which, if you read existing accounts of queer art history, you're essentially reading about New York City. You're reading a little bit about San Francisco. You're not reading about much, if anything, that happened in Chicago. So I guess I'm wondering if any of you could just talk about what your experience has been of the queer art scene in the city, and also maybe why you think it's been somewhat overlooked nationally, at least.
Well, at the interpersonal level, I think there's been a lot of wonderful connections made by me and by many other people among gay artists in the city. But in terms of institutional help and assistance and interest, it has sucked, It's really been awful. And, I was a professor at UIC for 31 years and taught a lot of really wonderful graduate students. And the U-Haul was packed at graduation, They couldn't get out of this town fast enough, And that's really, really broken my heart over and over again, because I would love to see these people settle here, have careers here, and build communities here. And that's just never happened, and it's still not happening. So I fall to the major institutions in this, excuse me, Jack. I fault the major institutions in this city for simply neglecting, ignoring, and refusing to support local art, even when it was perfectly worthwhile supporting. I mean, when it was really wonderful art. So that's my 2 cents on that topic.
I don't recall much of what we would call gay art within the black community at that time. They could be. When I saw the show Art AIDS America in Chicago, I was kind of surprised that there were people that might have been speaking about it, but that usually it was sort of circuitous to get to that point. I think we have basically tried to keep our presentations kind of always just below the surface. I'm going to keep going back to that. So the art that was coming out in the 80s and so forth would not have been screaming that. That we have restrictions within our own communities that were family, church, and all that stuff, that nobody would be wanting to really wave the flag. And now today it's a different story. But back then, no, we wouldn't have done that. So I wouldn't have seen much art or know many people that would do that.
Fair.
I think that, in my 20s, I squandered my youth in Chicago, and it was a true joy. Like, I feel like it was a good time. And I think about a queer art scene that I was part of then that kind of produced pilot TV that we were talking about earlier, which was, we were able to kind of take over a building and do a conference on trans feminism that took the form of a kind of independent TV studio, where the panels were people making television shows and learning about how to use equipment and such. And like just the scene that produced that, and like a lot about kind of apartment shows and house shows, and this sort of commitment to some of the freedoms that Chicago offers as being off the map. Like, it doesn't have to be in a gallery. It doesn't have to be in a museum to be legitimate practice.
Yeah,
Like,
that's really good.
It's in how we live.
Right. Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. And I think the support that there has been for queer art in Chicago has been relatively underground. I mean, like, Iceberg Projects is a really fabulous example of that. John Neff is in the audience. Hi. I don't know if Dan's here. But yeah, you have spaces like Iceberg Project. You have projects like Pilot TV. I also think some of your art collection, Patric has an incredible collection of art by African-American artists. How many pieces do you have? It's something ridiculous.
I don't know.
It's like,
But I wanted to add something.
Like
I did think
3,000.
about something from that time period that would have been an artistic expression of that, and that was in the area of performance. Is that we would have things like Finney's Ball, where you would have the cross-dressing and so forth. That was a major thing in the black community.
Yeah.
Those shows. But to take it down to the actual street level, no. But those were big. Those
Yeah.
were very, very big.
yeah, that's fun. Okay, so I think we're going to wrap the formal portion of the panel. And we have time for maybe one, maybe two questions from the audience. Anyone?
Hi. A lot of your work deals with the physical spaces for queer and gay people. I'm just wondering about how the internet has really changed the gay experience. Where you don't have these cruising spots as much, and now you have apps, or how you can have this kind of queer community that you build on the internet. Like, one of the first introductions to Edie I had was through Ryan Dracarin's work, and being in a rural area and having access to this more queer space online. So if you guys could talk about that.
Does anyone want to talk about this? I mean, I can say, thank you for the question. Was that Mickey? Thanks, Mickey. I mean, that's certainly one of the reasons why, I think we could probably say that's one of the reasons why there aren't as many like gay, lesbian, queer bars as there used to be, right? Is that the function that those places served as like meeting places or places to cruise has to a certain extent been like displaced by or disrupted by these, cruising apps. Yeah, but Can you remind me what the actual question was, Mickey?
Well,
Yeah. Sure.
I'm
Yeah,
going to say
certainly.
that the internet is one phenomenon that has actually brought about a change. But we can't ignore the fact that we went through a plague, and people are afraid. And then after the plague, we had this crisis of violence that came with crack, and that broke down all the social relationships, the easy social relationships that existed in the 1980s. You could talk to people on the L and bus and anywhere. It was okay to just start talking. So, well, if you can talk, you can kind of get into a relationship. But all that's gone. People are afraid, one, because of this concept that we survived a plague, and then the violence that came with the crack epidemic just made everybody kind of shudder. But internet is definitely part of it.
I would add one more thing, which was that acceptance is a two-edged sword. Gay people have longed so much and for so long for to be accepted by the majority of society, but with that acceptance goes a kind of insistence on a kind of conformity and you name it. I think it's kind of clear what I'm trying to say, but
Assimilation, yeah.
but it's not a unilateral blessing by any means. So I see that as something that needs to be kind of managed in a way. Like, yeah, we're glad you like us, but not that much. We're not that interested. Yeah. All right.
Any other questions?
And
Please.
Hi, good afternoon. Well, thank you so much for this talk, first of all. And second, two questions in one. How everyone feels about this show being intergenerational? Do you know each other in the show? And what are we expecting as an audience in the show?
Well, do you guys want to talk to the intergenerational part?
Well, I definitely am excited about the intergenerational because that's the world I grew up in. In the bars that I went to, they'd be wheeling people in at 80 years old, and they would be around with the teeny boppers. That we had an intergenerational environment, so I'm excited about that.
Yeah.
I'd say, I've been part of intergenerational scenes, and that's always a really exciting. It's a great conversation. It's good to have. I think it's really healthy to be oh yeah, these folks are younger than me. These folks are older than me. Here I am.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We are partnering with a group called the LGBTQ Intergenerational Dialogues Project for some programming related to the exhibition. And I was talking with some of those folks, and they were talking about how just because many queer people don't have children, that kind of intergenerationality just isn't necessarily built into queer family structures per se. So it's there is a way in which intergenerational dialogues often don't happen amongst queer communities. So I think it is an important thing. I think in the context of the show, I was really interested in how in the 1980s, really kind of more in the latter part of the 1980s, amidst AIDS activism, activists started reclaiming this term queer and imagining this sort of, identity and political sensibility around this term. So I'm curious how that term has really kind of survived and formed the basis of a lot of the way that a lot of people live and describe themselves today. So I thought that intergenerational part was really important. Let's think about why people in the 80s started using this term and kind of laid the foundation for the way that a lot of people live today. And then in terms of what you can expect in the show, you can expect a lot. This was a really small sample, a really great but small sample of what's in the show. Of course, there's photography. We have beautiful drawing and painting like Edie's. There's video. There will be performances, sculpture, really everything, as much as I could fit in the gallery. Thank you.
Time.
One more, or should we wrap?
Oh, we have
Okay.
time.
Is there another question? Anyone? Back here.
I have a question. It's for Pat, but thank you all so much for sharing. I noticed that in the 4 photographs that we have on the screen, most of the faces are obstructed or out of view. I'm wondering if that goes along with this idea of being just below the surface or just below visibility as a Black gay man in the 80s, or if that is completely just a coincidence that we have these 4 on the screen.
It's basically a coincidence because these were photographs like the one that's up now, Alley Joint, is that he was going out of the Rialto to smoke a joint because they had just put the prohibition on that you no longer can smoke in the joint. You have to go outside because they had some raids and so forth. This is a person that I've taken numerous pictures of that because he asked me for them. So his face is well known. I've got tons of pictures of him.
Yeah.
It was just the coincidence that I'm capturing him walking out.
Yeah.
The one, Dear Mama, I was just fascinated that in this seedy joint, I mean, just everything is going on. This man pulls out a piece of paper and starts writing a letter to his mother. It's just, and I'm trying to think, what would you be talking to your mother about in this place, this den of iniquity? And then the 2 young men with waves, that is not a picture where they asked me. I just caught that. And I said, oh, wow, look at this. I said, you could feel the communication going on between them, and yet they don't have the what is considered sort of the view or the appearance of the gay or queer people. But you could tell that there was something going on.
And you can still tell that they're very beautiful.
Right. Thank you.
Okay.
And the last one
Oh, sure.
is Mike.
Oh, yeah, this is a fun
That
story.
is his name. He was one of the people that stayed outside of the Rialto. And if you were looking at this scene, the Harold Washington Library would be right behind him. And he was part of that whole scene of people during that time that would use belt buckles to advertise what they were thinking about and what they were trying to get. His name is Mike, okay? But he's selling. He would never come into the Rialto. He would only sit out on side of the cars, and because that whole environment was very, very transactional. Okay. But I think it was the fact that I'm underneath the L. I didn't use a flash, so his face is not available. But he did ask me for the photograph.
All right, thank you so much. Doug, Patric, Edie, thank you so much for being so generous with your words today. Everyone, the show opens July 5th. I hope to see you all there this summer. Yeah, that's all. Thanks so much.